Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a terrific honor for me to be here and to receive that doctorate. I am very honored indeed. But they didn't warn me when they asked me to make a speech that they were going to have such brilliant speeches beforehand, which you all listened to, and particularly from your prize-winning student. She was wonderful, a really wonderful speech. I think another round of applause for her. When my friend, that great and good man, and he is a great and good man, Mr. Rami Koç, asked me to deliver this commencement address, I was deeply honored and touched. To follow the line of very distinguished people who have done it in the past is a privilege for me indeed. But what Mr. Koç didn't know, perhaps, although he knows a lot of things, but perhaps he didn't know this, that when he asked me to speak to you, there was a personal reason that the invitation had special meaning for me. This is your day, but I hope you will allow me a short personal story derived from my family history to explain what I mean. My great-grandfather, who carried the same name as I do, William Waldegrave, is buried in Turkey. He died in 1854, fighting alongside Ottoman troops against the Russian Empire in the war we British call the Crimean War. He was fatally wounded at the Battle of the Alma and is buried at Haydar Pasha Cemetery, where I went to see his grave yesterday. And his grave is in perfect condition and honor, and always has been since the day he died. So I've always felt that Turkey has a little bit of a special place for me and my family in our story. Not for nothing did that very great man, Kemal Atatürk, say, after a different conflict, let's give him a round of applause, one of the great men of the world. Our greatest man, Winston Churchill, hugely admired Atatürk, partly because Atatürk and his friends beat Winston Churchill in the First World War, and therefore Churchill always admired him. Now, Atatürk said after a different conflict that heroes who shed their blood and lost their lives are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. Let me therefore begin this address by paying a debt of thanks to Turkey on behalf of my family for that honored resting place for another William Waldegrave of long ago. Now, let's come up to a little bit more up to date. Last year, your predecessors at commencement had the pleasure, and I think it was a real pleasure, of listening to a distinguished speaker from Greece, Alexis Tsipras, former Prime Minister and man of the left. Wrong hand, that side. Now, I was a politician too in my day. Though I never led my country, there was a rather large competitor in the way called Margaret Thatcher. And I was her last appointment to the British cabinet, having served as a minister for a good many years. She and I were people of the right in British politics. And yet I'm proud to be here speaking as a successor to Alexis Tsipras. How can that be? It's because Mr. Tsipras and I share one all-important area of agreement with all our disagreements, and it's more powerful in the end than those disagreements. We both believe in free argument, open discussion, and democracy. And to find that this great university has the vision and the confidence to welcome such different strands of thinking represents, to me, everything I most applaud and admire. You are truly lucky to attend a university which celebrates such genuine breadth of inquiry and such genuine commitment to free argument and discussion, which are the essence of the concept of a university. You and your family and friends understand that well, or you wouldn't be studying here in the first place, in a university which has already, in quite a short history, become renowned internationally for the quality of its teaching and research, and for the distinction of its alumni, who are major contributors already to the good of your nation and the international community. And I think, if I may, that I would like to pause one more time. You've had plenty of well-earned applause, and say, yes, we are here to celebrate all of you, we certainly are, but it's proper also to ask for applause for all those who have taught you, some of whom are standing behind me, and for all those, as your prize-winning student said, behind the scenes who make the university work. One more round of applause for all those people. And then one more round of applause for the greatest supporters of all, which are your friends and family. And you know better than I, you wouldn't be able to do it without them. So for all of them. So we celebrate you and all those who helped you to your achievement today. And now it's time to look forward. What's the world that you find yourselves launched into going to be like? What are the challenges and opportunities that my generation and Mr. Tsipras's generation have left for you? Because we've left one or two out of the kindness of our hearts for you to deal with. It's very easy to see the challenges. There is the political challenge to democracy, a worldwide challenge. Winston Churchill, our great war leader of the last century, once said, "No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms of government that have ever been tried." And those were quite wise words. Without the involvement of the people of a nation in the decisions which affect you, no state can be very happy or stable for long. Mind you, no one should say there's only one pattern of democracy in the world, that ancient Athens or London or Washington or anyone else has the final answer. But always, citizens must have the power to examine and to correct the mistakes of their leaders, or indeed of themselves, on the basis of free access to information based on truth. Access to true information is the lifeblood of democracy. Now, one of the greatest threats to good government you are going to face is the immense power of the networked information age, which can deliver so much good, but can also disseminate so much falsehood. There have been three fundamental information revolutions in human history. The first started not far from here, I think, where efficient writing was first invented thousands of years ago. Our memory as a species began to be preserved, and our knowledge reliably passed on. The second came in China and in Germany about half a millennium ago with the printing press and mass production of books and news sheets, which enabled ordinary people for the first time to gain access to information that their rulers may not have wanted them to have. The second revolution, therefore, limited the power of rulers to keep knowledge to themselves and therefore advanced the power of ordinary people. And now a third revolution, equal or perhaps even greater in power than these first two, derives from our understanding of science. This new and revolutionary knowledge has given us the World Wide Web, AI, quantum computing, about which we've heard today, and other possibilities of which we can hardly begin to think as yet. And it has meant that any one of us with a smartphone in our pocket, I've given mine to my wife to look after, has access to almost unlimited information. This is providing enormous benefit. But one thing this third communication revolution has also done is to make it far more difficult to discriminate between information that is true and information that is false. Swirling conspiracy theories can take the worldwide hold with phenomenal speed. Often it's not the truth, as the old saying has it, which wins out, but the best story, the story which fits our prejudices. And although some stories are merely ridiculous, that Elvis Presley's living on the moon, for example. Others are dangerous. Think of doctors and medical scientists having to combat scares about vaccines, for example. Think of the ease with which a few otherwise isolated, evil people can find supporters around the world. Think of how your children and my grandchildren have to be protected from the horrors to be found on the dark web. The power, still only in its infancy, of social media offers massive benefit in so many ways, but threatens massive danger too. Now, if I've ever learned one thing in my longish life, it is that nothing is inevitable in the progress of history. The good does not always win. Outcomes depend on us, on what we all do. So the dangers of the third information revolution can be avoided, but only if you and we, the future leaders, decide to take the necessary action. If you do, the future can be better than the present. If you don't, it can be worse, and democracy itself will suffer. However, there's another human construct, even older and in some ways more fundamental for civilization than democratic politics itself, and that is the law. Many societies, most, have long had law before they've had democracy. You can argue that law is one of the founding technologies of any society. If you don't have shared and accepted rules, perhaps you don't have a society at all, but just a collection of competing animals. It is not for nothing that at the heart of all the great ancient religions, there's always law. Here is another great challenge for you: how to maintain and, where necessary, recreate law in a world where sometimes it seems we are going backwards to an age when, in the words that the ancient Greek historian Thucydides put into the mouth of an imperialist Athenian, the words were, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." That is a recipe for anarchy and disaster, since no one knows who is strong without constant battle and destruction. It is also a recipe for poverty, because no sensible economy can survive if, for example, there's no such thing as binding contract or protection for the victims of crime. You will sometimes hear so-called realists claiming, in agreement with that Athenian imperialist of long ago, that relations between states never rest on law or morality. It's all just the law of the jungle, they say. That might is right and all else is just foolish idealism. But that savage doctrine is now just too dangerous to accept. I was born exactly a year after the atomic bombs, which have already been mentioned, that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those bombs of 1945 are trivial compared to the multitude of nuclear weapons now. Are we really to say, against the potential of such weapons, that we are to conduct our international conflicts with the same morality deployed by those ancient Athenians 2,500 years ago, armed with swords and spears? Surely not. So those of you who may enter government service, and I hope many do, as diplomats or soldiers or lawyers, have to consider whether the steps we have taken in the past towards systems of conflict resolution based on law can be reinforced and rebuilt. They are being attacked at the moment, as they will need to be rebuilt if your grandchildren and mine and my great-grandchildren are to be kept safe. And within our nations, the maintenance of fair and uncorrupt law is in the long-term interest of all of us, whether we think we're strong or weak. Now, so far, I've been challenging those of you in the social sciences, humanities, and law to help deal with the problems which the creativity of your colleagues in science and engineering are throwing up for us. But of course, the scientists and engineers are part of the solution as well as the problem. We can fear the ill effects of the misuse of technology, but we all celebrate the magnificent achievements that those technologies bring with them. You graduating nurses and doctors will have the chance of offering care and cures beyond the wildest dreams of your predecessors of 50 years ago. We need you scientists and engineers to help solve the huge problem of climate change, every year growing more urgent. The science is clear. The effects are beginning to be felt, and there is not very long to go before we shall be looking over a precipice. And against all the odds, I'm optimistic. I look at the people, look at you graduating today, and I see people who will produce the future technologies we need in order to clean up the damage done by past technologies. Let me tell you briefly about an old friend of mine. I say an old friend because he died aged 103 in 2022, so he was old in every sense of the word. He was called James Lovelock. He was all his life an independent scientist and inventor. He was a great environmental scientist. He believed in what he called the Gaia hypothesis of the interlocking relationships in the whole planet. He was extremely concerned about climate change, but towards the end of his life, he became rather optimistic. I'm giving up science, he used to say, and becoming an engineer. We all know what to do. It's just a matter of doing it. I think he was right. We have the technologies to save ourselves if we train enough engineers, data scientists, and the rest. Then we have to persuade ourselves to get on with it and do what we know is right before it's too late. Now, there's one group of you I haven't mentioned yet, you future business leaders. You are part of the solution too. In fact, you are fundamental to getting anything practical done. And if you doubt me, just look at what the Koç family have done themselves. And one more round of applause for them won't do any harm. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, my old boss, used to tell her version of the Christian story of the Good Samaritan. You remember, Jesus tells of a man who is robbed and left beaten up by the side of the road. And various grand people come down the road and pass by on the other side. Then along comes a Samaritan who comes from a people despised by the Jews at the time. He rescues the poor man and looks after him and pays for him at the next inn where he can stay until he recovers. Now, Jesus was telling the story to point out the fact that the good neighbor to the Jewish traveler was the despised Samaritan. But Mrs. Thatcher used to add her own twist. The Samaritan wouldn't have been any use, she used to say, if he didn't have any money in his pocket. It wasn't in the Bible, but it has some sense behind it. So you business leaders of the future, go and build good enterprises and use your money for the good of the world. The wealth you create is the foundation on which all else can be built. And if I may say so, you've been reminded of this already today. When you've made your first million or 10 million or more, remember this university and give back to it as others have given to it in the past. One word before I end about how best to live. You've heard some wise words on this already, and I don't disagree with anything that's been said. And I don't hold myself out as an example for anything. I've made many mistakes in my life. But one thing I think I've learned has to do with happiness. I don't believe, after observing so many different people in my life, that happiness comes when you seek after it directly. I've come to the conclusion that the best way to find lasting happiness derives from living life well. Learning to live well is, if you like learning a craft and becoming a good and honest craftsman of whatever activity he or she undertakes. Doing what you do well and honestly for the right motives, not for short-term applause or money or glory or because it's right, but because it's the right thing to do. That's what creates happiness for yourself and for those whom you love and you care. I've known many people who have achieved great happiness after suffering and after winning famous battles, like Mr. Mandela, with whom I had the privilege of working. I've known happy people who have lived quiet lives, caring for their own family and working with commitment at their craft. Business people, writers, farmers, lawyers, teachers. What they have in common is that they're not driven by the search for short-term pleasure or popularity or fame. You deserve your share of happiness for yourselves, for your families and communities and your great country of Turkey, and you will win it, but by living life well. Your nation is one of the great nations of the world, in which some of the most ancient cultures are joined together. in a way which I think is almost unique on our planet. It's a great fusion of ancient traditions with modernity, and it's unique and it's wonderful. You have great things to do here at home in Turkey, but also around the world, building a better planet for your children and grandchildren, solving the problems my generation has generously left you, remembering and celebrating the greatest traditions of the past, but building on them to meet new problems and create new possibilities that our ancestors couldn't have imagined. There are plenty of difficulties ahead of you, I can tell you. But as I look out at the faces today and the energy and the intelligence I see in front of you, I feel hope. And I wish you good fortune with all my heart.